Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our discussion on the path to in-house. I'm Amy Goldstein, Chair of Training Programs for the Legal Mentor Network and founder of Grayson Allen, a recruiting and career coaching firm for attorneys. For those of you who are not familiar, the Legal Mentor Network is a nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal mentoring to law students and junior attorneys. You can find information out about the organization and also how to join as a mentee or a mentor at our website, legalmentornetwork.org. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. Feel free to put them in the Q&A during the webinar if we can get to them. As the conversation is happening, we will, but know that there will be time at the end. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Lindsay Barnes, our moderator, for introductions.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. And hello to everyone joining us today. Welcome to this Legal Mentor Network panel discussion of the paths to in-house. As Amy said, my name is Lindsay Barnes. I'm a senior counsel at Capital One, where I work on issues related to consumer financial credit. I'm coming to you today from our offices here in Richmond, Virginia, which is still sitting under a sheet of ice, but we'll get through okay. I'll be moderating today's discussion about how to find work as an in-house lawyer, what working in-house is like, and what you can do now to help prepare yourself for a career as an in-house lawyer. We'll be taking some questions from the chat, as Amy said, so if you've got them, just use the function there. On the panel today are three wonderful colleagues, all of whom are experienced in-house counsel. Afia Jordan is Associate General Counsel at Panasonic North America. She's coming to us from New York City today and works out of Panasonic's headquarters in Newark, New Jersey. George Matthew is GC for Army Air Force Systems at Lockheed Martin, based in Stratford, Connecticut. And Flavia Naves is of counsel at Hathaway and Coons. She has a wealth of in-house experience and is currently a fractional GC to a few entities. She's going to tell us what that's like, and is based in San Francisco. Since it's the title of today's discussion, I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to describe their path to working in-house. Afia, why don't we start with you?
Sure. As Lindsay said, I work at Panasonic North America, the North America headquarters for the Japanese company Panasonic Holdings Corporation. I lead both the litigation and the corporate affairs teams. I've been at Panasonic for about 2.5 years now. I made the switch during the pandemic, so it was interesting onboarding completely remotely. And I came to Panasonic from JP Morgan Chase & Co. in the New York headquarters in the legal department, where I had been for 5 years prior to that. Before I joined JP Morgan, I was at private practice at several large law firms around New York City. And so I practiced for about 10 years at the law firm level, and before I went in-house. I can't believe how long I've been out of law school, but it's been a while. And then ultimately, I did enjoy, I did primarily litigation, though I did work on other matters as well as needed, but I was a litigator. I spent a lot of time in court, a lot of time writing briefs. Really the path to in-house started with me reviewing a file one day and thinking, wow, if only somebody had sort of cautioned them about the language that was here, or, made a different decision in the way that they dealt with this person, we wouldn't be in litigation right now. And so it was me thinking, well, maybe that person is me. I'm not a person who super loves the billable hour thing. I find that I'm very efficient, and it's really not my strong suit to be billing tons of hours on things that take me a couple of minutes. And so there were a lot of things about going in-house that seemed very attractive. And I was working on financial services litigation, and that's how I ended up at JP Morgan. I was able to leverage that skill set on the financial services litigation into a role on a regulatory team. And a lot of what I did was prevent some of the issues initially when I got to the firm, working with our outside firms who send certain notifications to consumers, making sure they're doing the right thing so it doesn't end up in litigation. And ultimately, I was able to leverage that experience at JP Morgan. I did some stretch assignments, and I was able to use that to come over to Panasonic, where I am today. So that's the abbreviated version of my path to in-house.
Thanks, Sophia. Appreciate it. Yeah, I too was a litigator before I went in-house, and I relate to a lot of what you said there, as we'll discuss in a little bit. George, why don't you go next?
Thanks, Lindsay. Good morning, good afternoon to fellow panelists and folks attending. And a lot of what Afia said resonated with me, and also I think I'm the only member on the panel who served on active duty and now reservist. So my path to in-house certainly, I'd like to think, began maybe even before the JAG Corps, with the U.S. Air Force JAG Corps. I was one of the few but proud 1Ls who absolutely just loved contracts. So, that was contracts was number one. Everything else was number 4, 5, and 6. So, foolishly, or, not knowing any better, day one of week one of law school, I told myself, this is what I'm going to do this. I'm going to find a way to practice contracts. And, it might be in-house, might be, I'm not sure if it'll be the law firm, but we'll see where this adventure takes us. And I started on active duty with the JAG Corps, and I served 12 years. And, I really, probably the best assignments I had an opportunity. The Air Force gave me an opportunity to litigate contract protests and claims. And that was really where while I did enjoy the litigation, I realized that it's just so much more fun working with your acquisition planning teams, with your contracts functions, with other functionals, really trying to prevent the state in which we've arrived. And there were a lot of times I'd ask the question like, hey, why didn't we kind of think about this earlier? Well, it's just the tyranny of time. And, and of course, everyone is their good intentions, and unfortunately things just go awry. So that was really what put me on the path to, hey, this is something I'd really want to do, work with the team prior to getting to a position of litigation. I was very fortunate to have reserve JAGs, as I'm right now, who worked for different companies, whether it's General Dynamics, Northrop, or Lockheed. They would come in and share their experiences, and that absolutely was inspirational and something that I wanted to do. I separated 4 years ago from active duty and worked for a couple of federal agencies for Department of Homeland Security, doing government contracts, litigation, but also a lot as the program attorney. So advising the client on what we want to procure, what's the best way, what the risk is. And then after that with the Agency for International Development, where that I really sharpened that focus on advising the program. And fortunately, there was an opportunity with Lockheed, and very fortunate to be here now. Over.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it. And yeah, a very different path from the first one that we heard there. Some litigation overlap there, but because you were coming up through the JAG Corps and then through government after that, very different kind of path here. I'll go to Flavia. Why don't you tell us about we talked about this before. It's a rather unusual path to in-house.
Yeah, so I add a third path that it's even more unexpected. So if you can hear the spice in my words, I'm not from the United States originally. I was born in Brazil. So I graduated from law school in Brazil. Law school in Brazil is after high school, as in many other countries, and you go to law school for 5 years instead of 3. And when you graduate, you have to present a thesis for graduation. So my thesis for graduation was corporate law. I was working in a law firm in Brazil at that time, and I was very passionate about business transactions. Like you, George, I really liked contracts, and my favorite class in my LLM program in the United States was business organizations. And so I was very passionate about that. So when I got my LLM in the US, my first job here was actually clerking for a judge. And I thought that after my clerkship, I was going to go back to a law firm, as I did in Brazil. But what that actually did is show to me that while I love my colleagues and my profession, I do not want to work with lawyers every day. I want to work with business people. So what I did is after that clerkship, which was almost 3 years, I went in-house. So my career in the United States has been completely in-house, except for the clerkship that I did after my program here. And I work in companies of varied sizes and locations and industries. I started in manufacturing in Pennsylvania, then I moved to California and I went into software licensing, technology development, copyrights. I transitioned to entertainment with television and music. And then I transitioned to payments, and to money transmission, lending, and ended up in digital assets and blockchain. So I spent longer than I like to admit, 18 years in-house. And I had my first 3 years as a law clerk for a judge, which I still keep in touch with him every day. I say it was probably the best jobs I've ever had. But it really kind of having that experience with a judge being in court and saying, wow, I really like this, but no, I don't want to talk law every day. I want to talk to people that have different perspectives than I do. They will inform my decision as their counsel. I want to hear from people that have an approach to technology, to marketing, to finance, to product development. And I want to hear their perspectives to the issues that I'm considering. And that those perspectives will inform my decision. I cannot sit here and just look at the law and say, this is what you need to do. That is not serving my client well. So that's how I decided to go in-house and have not looked back.
Thanks, Flavia. Really appreciate it. Yeah. So I think as you just heard there from all of us, no one path to this work. You know, like some of the folks here, after a couple of clerkships, I was a litigator as well for a couple of large law firms in Washington, D.C. I found that the cases and projects I liked working on best were the ones where I was getting to know one client really well over the long term, getting to know the company's business and where the issue I was working on fit into their overall picture as a company, where it fit into their overall sense of the regulation of their industry. Sort of those concentric circles were really interesting to me. And the times where I got to work with not just the in-house lawyers at my clients, but also their operations folks, their sales folks, their government relations folks. Over time, I found that the ones that I liked working on the most were less about winning a particular legal battle in the courts and much more about what we've talked about before, problem solving. How do we build better processes to prevent or mitigate legal risk, things like that. And so that was what first got me interested in in-house. And then was lucky enough to have cultivated a network of folks that I could call on and talk to when I was thinking about making the move. And it was what led me here to Capital One here in Richmond, where I would say for a lot of the roles that we hire for, there are varying levels of subject matter expertise that are required for that. I came in with some financial services experience, but it wasn't by any means the meat and potatoes of what I did as a litigator, and have been lucky enough to land somewhere where there is a bit of a runway. So I wouldn't, and there are some things that are just that every company needs. Every company needs HR folks. Every company needs increasingly cybersecurity folks. Things like that. Want to go back to the paths that the different individual panelists took here. What were the skills that you cultivated in your previous working life that translated best to in-house?
I can take that if you want from the start. One thing, in my last role that really served me well coming in-house was I really started to develop great relationships with the clients. And a lot of the times the clients that I was working with were not the in-house lawyers, they were the actual people in the business. And so being able to communicate with them and being able to explain things in clear terms without, getting too far into the weeds, because they don't necessarily want to know all of your legal thinking and all of your processes. They want to know big picture. And so being able to start to develop those communication skills has really served me well coming in-house, where a lot of the times I'm communicating with the CEO or the CFO or folks who simply don't have a lot of time for all of our nerdy legal talk. And so, that's something that served me well, and having great writing skills. That's not something you can ever underestimate, not just for emails, but in terms of like presentations you may have to put together. You're going to need those skills, both orally and written communication skills.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'm gonna pick up on what Effie left off and actually answer a question that Angeline had in the Q&A. So I cannot emphasize enough the ability to partner with the business, right? In my last role as general counsel for Circle, I call my team legal business partners. This was not the legal department. We were the legal business partners, and we are here to help the business team be successful. Job is to make the business grow in a risk-based manner and make sure that the business is being advised accordingly. So in working with them and developing that relationship, the ability to speak the business language, to be concise, to address their needs, to get to actually to the matter is critical. Outside counsel or other counsel, from practicing in different capacities may be enticed to write long emails to a fierce point and send you a memo that is 10 pages long to address a single question, right? Knowing how to communicate with the business to deliver the message in a concise manner that gets them to what they need to do is really, really critical. And actually, this is where the transferability of skills becomes so important between industries, because if you heard my path between industries that I went to, from software to this, you would think, well, she doesn't have the background in financial services, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. And actually, the skill that was most transferable, that allowed me to move between industries and actually acquire the knowledge of that industry, was my ability to work with the business, because that didn't change. You working with the business, you work with the businesses in any industry that you want to work with. If you're a good legal business partner, you can learn the subject matter expertise that your client needs you to, the industry that they are in. To Lindsay's point, right, when he came into Capital One, he knew some financial service, but that was not the meat and potatoes. You may know something and you learn the rest as you do the job, but being a really good legal business partner, I think that is the one skill that is going to make you the most successful in-house.
I think that's absolutely right. And tying into a question that Dave posed in the chat about how to present skills that you've developed as a litigator as applicable to an in-house role, or that are helpful in an in-house role. I've thought about this quite a bit. I think the communication thing is at the top of the list there, in terms of litigators. Our bread and butter is words and trying to communicate ideas, often to busy audiences, whether that's a judge, whether that's a partner that you're researching something for. That is immediately translatable to in-house work, because the further you go in in-house work, the increasingly busy the audience that you're writing to is. And usually the higher up the person in your organization, the shorter the email has to be, because the busier they are. And so having that experience of writing in a really disciplined way and learning how to condense down further and further is a really useful skill to have. Also true of oral communications. Again, there are times where a deep dive is called for. Oftentimes, just understanding what level of detail somebody's going to need in the first place. Understanding, of course, what underlies what you're going to say, because you've got to know that really well to be able to communicate effectively. But understanding how to be concise in the first place. I'd also say, to something Afia mentioned in her introduction, litigators have experience looking at where things went wrong. Litigation happens when there's been a breakdown in a business relationship, or some other breakdown in a process, things have gone wrong. Whether it's a contract term that was ambiguous, or an email that could have been a phone call, or what, take what you want. And so we have this database in our heads of all the ways that legal risk can arise and can lead to litigation. We've also heard judges tell our partners and tell our clients what does and does not fly in their minds. And so it gives you the credibility to be able to come in-house and say, look, I've seen this before, or I worked on a case once that was similar to this situation, and now learning how to analogize there with your the substantive experience that you've got, because you've seen the end of this story a few times, and I think that gives you some credibility. Others thoughts about things that you found useful to develop when you were before you went in-house that have served you well.
So I'll say one of the best skills developed in the military in my particular case was really, and a lot of what has been touched on before, which is being able to communicate concisely to very busy people. Nobody has time, and I would assume, for C-suite, no one really has time to read a 20-page memo, or they're not interested in why a particular it's fascinating precedent in New York and how that ties in the grand scheme of how the law developed. It's, hey, let me know, can I move forward? What's the risk? What is the risk of not complying with what you identify as risk? Is this just a risk, or is it a substantial risk? And this is just something you've got to get comfortable in the gray. So no, you have to be comfortable understanding and explaining to your client that this is what the legal read is, and I see the risk. And it's at the end of the day, sometimes you're going to get an answer saying, well, I'm fine with that, and you have to be okay as the counselor with that response. For me, I'll say my experience is a little different from some of the panel members. I was able to directly translate my government contracts and contracts experience directly into Lockheed Martin. Again, in aerospace and defense it's a very different industry than others. And I'll say here, if you have the litigation helped, but really what helped was that direct experience in government contracts. And now of course, it's expanded to commercial contracts, international contracts, but again, it stays with contracts. So unlike I think what I've heard, I haven't had to really stray outside of that area. And that's really what the company is looking for.
Yeah, if you've got the substantive experience for a given industry, and it's you can see a way to use it in an in-house role, by all means go for that. If that's something you want, if you're on a path already in that industry and want to keep going with it, I think that's a great approach. How do you all spend your days? I think it varies depending on the kind of company that you're working for, the kind of role you're in. I'd be curious to know, like, what's a typical day like for one of you?
I want to tell you there is no typical day. I mean, there's an idea of a day, and then there's the actual day. And I think we'll probably all agree. I certainly will tell you, unlike law firm practice, there are just an obscene number of phone calls. I've never had to have this many phone calls in a day. I can be on 10 calls, and then I'm going to start my substantive work, my written work, probably at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or something. So that does happen a lot. It really does depend on any type of situation that comes up that's either a true emergency or something that somebody perceives to be an emergency. And you have to take those seriously as well. But it really is, it depends. I mean, for some people, it's going to be more smooth depending on what your role is. If you have a pretty stable role, for certainly as a litigator or a person who does corporate governance or anybody dealing with risks to the company, you're going to have any number of people reaching out to you, and any idea that you had for your day is going to shift. So I definitely have a lot of meetings. I manage people, so I meet with them and go over their projects as well. If I have a board meeting, I'll do those. You know, if somebody says, you know, now all of a sudden I need this thing signed, that happens. If somebody needs to put out a press release, that changes the day, you know. It really just depends, and it's always interesting. I am never twiddling my thumbs, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, what Afia said there, Lindsay, I think it's important for folks that are transitioning from a law firm to understand. She pointed out that, you know, she doesn't like billable hours, but actually coming in-house is really not a path to potentially working less hours. Sometimes it's actually working more. To her statement, you know, she'll spend the entire day on calls and then actually start substantive work at 5 o'clock. You know, being on the West Coast, my former employer was on the East Coast, so my hours were very early. I would start around 6:30 a.m. my time to be closer to their time. And then around 3 o'clock in the afternoon for me, which 6 p.m. on the East Coast, things would die down. That's when I would actually start working, because I spent 6:30 a.m. until 3 o'clock in the afternoon on calls. And then I will have about a 2-hour window in which I can just jam as much work as I can, because people are having dinner, putting their kids to bed, or whatever is happening on the East Coast. And then I will start getting pinged again after people put their kids to bed and whatever it is, because now catching up for another hour before they go to sleep. So then I have another 2 hours, and then I can have my dinner, I can have my evening and everything. So these are extremely long days. You're not imputing everything that you put in a sheet, but you are working on a straight day about 12, 14 hours now. So I just want folks to understand that this is not an exit to working less. To Afia's point, you can set up your entire day, say, oh, tomorrow, here's my list of things that I have to tackle. And you wake up and to something completely unexpected, completely pivots your day. Now you have to take attention to that, but you still have to do the things that you plan. So you have to figure out how to get it all done. And so it is, you need to have really good project management skills to be able to do it all with the amount of time that you have. So I think, to what George was saying, being concise and to the point with your clients also helps, because you're not crafting 20-page memos, right? You're working with your client and you work on a risk-based approach as well. You don't have to throw them the kitchen sink and say the sky's falling, here's the 1% chance of this happening. Right? Your client doesn't really want to know that. They want to know, to George's point, is what is, you know, low, medium, and high risk to me? How would this impact me? And pretty much they don't care about the lows, medium, and high. If this happens, how would this impact me or the company? What are the risks associated with it? So they make the decision. And we as counsel who have been trained to bubble wrap our client and have no risk at all have to be okay with the fact that risk will be absorbed by the business, right? Because they made the decision understanding the risk that you highlighted to them, and you have to proceed with that. So these fast-paced decisions that you make throughout the day are the way that you can actually accumulate all this work that needs to get done within a 24-hour window. But it's not, I just want to make sure that folks understand they don't leave law firm work and come in-house and be like, oh my God, this is not what I expect. It's not a path to working less. So I just want to make sure that that perception is shattered, because it's not how it is.
That's absolutely right, Flavia. I have found that my days are more intense than they were when I was in private practice. Private practice as a litigator, I'm often in my office by myself, researching, writing. I might have a meeting or two over the course of a week with partners or other lawyers I'm working on things with. But it's a much more solo existence in some ways. But so my days now are much more intense. They're much more meeting oriented. As others have commented, you know, I'd say 6 to 7 hours of my day is Zoom calls like this one, or in-person meetings here in our offices. And, you know, to Flavia's point, oftentimes you are there to assess risk. It's not a black or white, yes, you can do this, no, you cannot do this. It's, you know, what's the level of risk? How does it fit into the rest of what the business is working on? What kinds of risk are we talking about here? There's the risk of there's legal risk, but there's also regulatory risks. You know, in my industry, what is the CFPB or what are the OCC concerned about this week? There's political risk. What is the Senate, Banking Committee curious about? What kind of bills are percolating at the state and federal level? And then there's just plain old optics risk, which is, hey, yeah, you could do this, but it looks real bad for XYZ reasons. Or have you thought about what the headline is if this was a more if this was a broadly reported story, and what's our response? So I think I want to throw the question open to the panel here. How else have you found it helpful or useful to frame risk? Because it's not something I did a whole lot of in private practice. I'd be curious to know how others do it.
Well, I can get started because I think, Lindsay, this comes very prominent, and George, probably for your industry as well. When you're dealing with, financial services, anything that is regulated, the risk, it's you add different things to it when you consider not just reputational, as you mentioned last, but you have political, and economical and regulatory and everything else, right? I mean, one misstep that you take, you can lose your licenses and have suspension, and then you're not running your business anymore. So what I would do to talk to the business to make them understand the risk is we employ this traffic light approach. So it was either green, yellow, or red. Like, you need to use words that the business can assimilate, and it can make this kind of simpler for them. And green was like, listen, this is very low risk. This is probably less than 20% chance of happening. Or if it were to happen, this is the impact to the business, which is minimal, right? And then you go to the medium, which is between whatever percentage. This is all determined by your risk team in partnership with you, right? And then you go to the high. The high one is which you are no longer able to run your business. You're either being suspended or you're being terminated. There are fines, right? The proverbial, everyone's go to jail, the sky's falling situation. So if you put those in context to the business and say, this is where we are, this is what could happen, and here's the thing. Now, the one thing that is critical for the business to understand is that risk is not singular, it's cumulative. So if they make a decision now for risk that is yellow, next time they make another one that is yellow, that yellow is now orange, trending towards the right, because you have more risk accumulated in the business, right? And you so on, and you do that. When you work in regulated industries, a partnership between the legal team and the risk and compliance teams is critical. I would say that my compliance and risk officer would sneeze, I would catch a cold, right? He was the honey to my bees, the yin to my yang, that kind of thing, right? We can't live without each other. So the business makes its own risk assessment of what they are, right? Here's the risk in my industry, of my products, the clients that I service. Do I face consumers? Do I face businesses? All of that changes. Am I in the US? Am I global? What do I do? All these things assess risk. Once you make that risk assessment, then that's the baseline for you to make your informed decisions from risk, from green to yellow to red. Because if you're coming from an industry that is natively high risk, for example, digital assets, blockchain, the perception of risk is going to be very different than if you're dealing with a widgets builder, someone that builds widgets, right? That's very different risk assessment. So that's how you do that. So what the way that I try to work, and my compliance officer as well with the business, is let's try to make this very simple for them to understand the metrics that we're using, because sometimes you're talking to engineers or product people that are very methodical, like black and white, like they like numbers. You give it to them and you explain to them, but they need to understand as well that they own the business. This is not the risk. This is not a legal decision, right? We are informing you, you own that risk. So going forward, you're the one who's going to make sure that you're tracking against it, that things are going well. And anytime that you assume risk, you are just getting a little bit closer to that red. So think about that. Right? So communicating with them in this way, that they understand that it's not you, the legal team, dictating things, but helping them make informed decisions. I think that's the best way to relay risk to the business team.
Yeah, our general counsel has a handy phrase that we're a seatbelt, not a brake, right? We're trying to make sure that that any decision that the business takes is done responsibly, is done knowingly, is done with an appropriate weighing of risk, that it's our job to point out to them, and it's our job to sort of frame for them and tell them, small, medium, large, red, yellow, green, and understanding that, except in very rare instances, it's the business's decision to take, and it's their risk to take on. Do others have thoughts on that?
I'll say in aerospace and defense, there's I don't have the benefit of the risk compliance officer. It's usually these, and it's interesting. Sometimes these issues are revealed in a meeting where there's no warning, and this is why you attend, you just listen, and sometimes you might hear something that's a red flag, or someone says, hey, there's no legal risk with this, so we're just going to proceed. And it wasn't you who said that as the lawyer. So that usually is a good indicator. And it really, from my experience, it's really a matter of, as has been said before, is stating here, this is where I see it. Here's the issue, whether it's, material breach we're talking about, or potential claims from our suppliers, or this is what the customer is going to claim, and these are the damages we could be on the hook for, and really just explaining this is what, and not really going into the specifics of case law, or it's just what it is, and just having a conversation and let the business make the call on it.
Yeah, and when they make that call, it's really important, I think, to document. Here's what we talked about. Here are the risks that we weighed. Here was the business's thought on why they're comfortable accepting this risk. Because having that kind of process in place is almost as important as the decision itself, or the risk that was decided on, because we're all busy folks. Some people come in and out of companies. Taking the time at the end of a project to document, all right, here's where we landed, here's what we discussed, and it's just so valuable to be able to go back and look, not just for your own sake, but in a highly regulated industry like financial services, being able to show that to regulators who regularly come in and conduct exams on banks, just as one example, to say, look, this is how we got here, and being meticulous about writing that up and having it and communicating it to the right people is a really important habit to be in. We're coming up on 12:40 here. We've gotten a couple of great questions in the chat that we'll take toward the end here. I think what I want to ask folks to weigh in on here is, if you're a law student or a new lawyer, and you are thinking about in-house work as an eventual career path for yourself, who are the kinds of lawyers that you have found are well suited to in-house work, and maybe some others who are, because of what they're interested in doing, or what they're good at, maybe not are not as well suited to in-house work as others?
I'll start by saying, I think a key characteristic an in-house lawyer should have is a great sense of humor, and don't take yourself seriously, and be the first one to acknowledge that you're not the smartest one in the room. And really, it's really about building relationships, right? And it's very important, in my opinion, to not put yourself in the box of legal. It's not legal, us versus the business. And developing that mindset early on, you're part of the team here. Yes, sure, we'll throw around things like risk and this legally, and you will hear, well, what's legal's take on this? What's the legal opinion? But it's really what's best for the business. Yes, you're technically my client, but my client is the corporation. I will protect the corporation. So just understanding and building a tolerance, and trying to think proactively in those terms.
Yeah, I think what George said there about being part of a team is the most critical for me, Lindsay. It's you know, when you work in law firms, and I'm going back to the time in which I was at this large firm in Brazil, right? You get assigned to projects, but you have this very kind of linear approach, like this is the work that I do, and these folks do this, these folks do that, and this is what I do. When you're in a company, it's not like this. You're part of a team. Everyone does it together. There's no, this person does this person does that. You may have to step up, even though your role may be regulatory counsel, and one day you'll have to do a contract because something came up and is related, and you have to do, and you have to help. So when you work as a team, it's less about, you know, your title, your this or that, is what, how you help the business grow. Like I said, my last position, I was a general counsel. I had a large team of over 20 lawyers. I did not see a line between me and my paralegal. We are all part of the team. We all do things together. It doesn't matter. I can be in a call and she can be in the call with me, and she knows a lot more about something than I do. And it's just not because I'm the general counsel, I'm the louder voice in the room. She has the floor. She's the one who's here to help the business, to George's point, be successful, right? So coming into the mentality that this is not about you, it's about the team. You are there as a team, and how you're going to help the entire company grow is critical. If you're very focused on titling and ranking and this and this and that, in-house is really not a good fit for that type of mindset. You need to come in. Obviously, we all want a fancy name and say that we're doing a good job, because it shows that we, you know, we're doing things and we have skill sets. But at the end of the day, it's less about that, because you can be the paralegal and doing a much better job than the general counsel is, right? So think about that when you decide to go in-house.
I agree with my colleagues that you definitely have to get rid of your ego. We don't have massive support teams. There's no managing clerk's office, none of that. You just share assistants, all of that. So, but I would also say, in addition to being adaptable in terms of your work style and how much you pitch in, you also have to be a curious person. And you are a person who takes responsibility for your own education and for learning, and you're a curious person and you want to learn new things, you would probably do well in-house, because things are always evolving. A company, you know, my company has been around for 100 years, but we're making new products all of the time. And there's different, you know, industries we're getting involved in. The regulatory landscape is changing. The consumer mindset is changing. And so, you know, when I went in-house, I pivoted from being a litigator to being a regulatory lawyer to being a corporate governance professional. And now I'm back to doing corporate governance and litigation. And that's a large part because I took it upon myself to ask and raise my hand and volunteer. And then it was my responsibility to get up to speed. We don't have the resources to do training programs, really in-depth training programs in-house like a lot of firms do. So I had to buy books. Like I actually walked over to the Columbia bookstore and I bought some books, and I read them on my free time just so I could know what everybody else was talking about in the meetings, but also what I was talking about in the meetings and taking the CLE. So if you're a person who is curious and you're willing to put in that extra time, you definitely would do well in-house, because things are always changing and adapting.
Yeah, agree with all that. You know, to folks' point there about how busy we are and how we're adapting to things all the time. I think maintaining that level of flexibility and curiosity is absolutely a critical component of being an effective in-house counsel. Knowing your audience, knowing what they're interested in hearing, knowing where what you're discussing fits into what they're working on is really helpful. I don't, you know, team player, absolutely. You are not the lawyer sent down from on high to decree what is and is not the law. You are there as an advisor and a counselor with your area of expertise that you bring along with everybody else's. You're not an operations expert. You're not necessarily even a compliance expert. As you know, there are companies that have, most companies have large compliance departments that you work alongside as partners, to Flavia's earlier point. And also just being comfortable with being uncomfortable I'd say is another positive trait to have. You know, as Afia was mentioning earlier, roles can change. What the business is focused on can change from week to week. No 2 days are necessarily going to look alike, and there isn't necessarily going to be a playbook for the risk that you're trying to weigh. Getting comfortable with those gray spaces and understanding how to weigh risk within those gray spaces is a really effective thing to have. We've got about 15 minutes left to the discussion here. I'd like to go to the audience questions that we've gotten here. And feel free to keep plugging questions into the Q&A function there. We'll get to as many of them as we can. I'll start with a question we got from Marielle. I hope that's how I pronounce your name. If not, I apologize. Marais, perhaps. Any advice to a third-year graduating law student who is just beginning their legal journey on how to remain organized while being inundated with work? I think we can all relate it to the inundated part of this. I'll just say that I've become much more reliant on my calendar since I went in-house, and being disciplined about maintaining my calendar, knowing which meetings I can accept and which I can't, based on when there's a conflict, just understanding what the bigger, more immediate thing on your plate is, and then understanding how to reach out to folks to see the meetings you absolutely need to be in, as well as understanding if people can backfill for you, I think is a really useful thing to be able to know. Also, and this is more applicable to where Marais is in her work, blocking off time for different tasks that you have, I have found to be really important. One of the first challenges I encountered in-house was I'm in meetings 6 to 7 hours a day. When am I going to get my work done? And you find over time that the meetings are the work to a great extent. But there is what we call head down work that really just requires you to be at your computer and either writing something or researching something, and being disciplined about maintaining the time to take care of that is an example of how I have found calendar management has really helped me to stay organized as I have gotten busier and have started working and I'm working on more things at a given moment. What about other folks?
Lindsay, I second what you said. Absolutely, staying on top of your calendar, and personally, I have like here's a tier 1, 2, 3. These are the things this week that I'm anticipating. Obviously, as we know, the day goes on, and then you all of a sudden you're rearranging all your tiers. But in addition to everything Lindsay said, I'd also say, especially for a 3L, just remember to take time to take care of yourself. And I'm talking about the mental health part, or whether it's, I try and go out for a run. It's only 20, 30 minutes at the most, and I feel refreshed in the middle of the day because I know how crazy it is when I have that time. So remember to do whatever it is that makes you tick. Make sure to set aside time and breathe.
Yeah, setting boundaries, really important where that's possible. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I cannot emphasize enough, you both already spoke about this, but the calendar organization, you can be invited to a multitude of calls that some of them, number one, you don't need to be, or number two, there are 2 or 3 lawyers involved in that call, and why do we have a party now happening, right? So figuring out, number one, you send that meeting invite, what are we meeting for? Number one, do I really need to be there, right? Number two, or why are me, Joe, and Pat in this call? Can just Pat be there and inform the team? So be really diligent about your calendar is the one thing. And then as you assess through the matters that you have to work with the day, knowing what the business is and their priorities are for that quarter or for that year, you will be able to prioritize your work as well. So sometimes the product team will come to me and say, hey, we need to review this potential feature or something, and it's urgent. I said, okay, if I look at the company's OKRs for this quarter or we're projecting through the end of the year, what is it solving? Oh, it's not in there, something different. I said, well, okay, I understand, that looks super exciting. However, I'm working on a quarter OKR that we're doing. Can you let me know whether I should stop working on that to prioritize this one? Otherwise, I will certainly work on this within 48 hours. I'll pick this up in 2 or 3 days. right? And usually the answer is it can wait, right? Because again, everyone thinks that is urgent, probably may not be, right? But if you acknowledge also the client, it becomes a lot of the questions. They just want to know that you have it and you take care of it. They don't need you to give the answer right now. If you get them and say, hey, Sam, got your email. I will get back to you within 48 hours with my initial thoughts, right? And then you get back to them, and from there it goes. So there's a way to manage this. Not everything needs to be done at that minute. You will know if there's an emergency, something comes down, the house is on fire, you have to drop and prioritize and figure that out. But if you work against the company's OKRs or projects or vision for that year, use that as your barometer for prioritization, and then work on the other matters with the business, you'll be able to work through your queue, in a manner that that is effective. But I cannot emphasize enough what George said. Take time, at least, once a day, just take a walk around the block if it's not exercising, but go out and do something. Just that breath of fresh air, even if it's minus 20 degrees outside, will change your mind completely and reset you, right? Being queued up behind your desk, you think that you're helping your client, you're doing a disservice to them by not being in the right mindset to do the job.
Take too much time with this question, but just in case anybody else struggles with this, I just like to put some pointers out. Like, I definitely have a problem focusing and paying attention. I'm distracted easily. And although I'm, old school and I write my notes by pen and paper, I found technology as my friend. So what I would say to you is to take advantage of the tools available to you, organize your inbox appropriately, pin messages at the top that you need to get to, hit the snooze so something comes back at a time, block your calendar with the actual specific task that you are going to do at that time. I find that helps for me because I know I've scheduled it in there, so I know I'm not dropping the ball on it. And I also use an app on my phone called the Forest app, which blocks all other apps from coming through on my phone. And I set like a specific amount of time that I need to do a task. I'll say I'm going to do 30 minutes of deep work on this, and then I can stand up and take a break. So to the extent any of that, helps you to be able to focus, it's your mind saying, if I do this now, I reward myself with something else later so that you're able to focus.
Absolutely. Yeah, all great advice. And, hopefully things you can start cultivating and getting in the habit of now, as it will, and I think everything we talked about here will serve you regardless of what kind of law you end up practicing. I think those are applicable in just about any practice, but especially in in-house work. We'll try to knock this one out quickly. Dave has a question about the breadth of experience, those with a lot of generalist experience. Is it better to highlight the breadth of that experience or specific experience applicable to the industry that you're applying to? I think the answer is both. It's, if you have generalist experience, you can show how you can parachute and be a quick study on lots of different things. But that you've developed these tools, whether it's as a litigator or a transactional attorney, what have you, that remain true and you've been honing consistently over time, regardless of the subject matter. Anybody else have thoughts on that about highlighting industry specific experience versus, generalist experience?
And yeah, I'll say,
Okay.
sorry. No, real quickly, at least with, aerospace and defense, if the position is highlighting employment, like, employment law, and, you talk about your generalist experience in tech or data privacy, that's not necessarily going to appeal. Again, it depends. So I really think it depends on the job and the industry you're applying in. If you're looking at an international contract position and you're talking about environmental law, that's likely going to be, that's great, but this person is not going to be able to hit the ground running. So that's my take on that. Over.
I'd say that's true. If they're looking for something very specific, like I'm never going to be a patent lawyer, but I have had to connect the dots for people. If you do want to pivot, you're going to have to do a lot of work to explain to them, one, how you are able to transfer that experience, the breadth of your general experience, because people aren't going to see it. But the other thing you might need to do is to show them how you have educated yourself and learned their industry and how you're willing to do more. When I mentioned earlier, that's one of the things I had to do was say, yeah, I would like you to hire me for this or to allow me to do this assignment. And that, you know, in return, I'm willing to do this. I'm going to take these courses. I'm going to, you know, read these books or whatever it is I need to do, talk to the educator. So I think, you know, you just have to do a bit more work if you really do want to shift industries.
Yep. We're almost at the top of the hour here. Thank you to each of our panelists for joining us today. I'll ask each of you for a parting thought here as we close. Flavia, I know you have to drop, so why don't you go first?
Thank you. So first of all, I hope this was a helpful call to the attendees, that you took some nuggets of wisdom away from you. And if I have to say, you know, my one parting thought is, take the first step. It can seem daunting to transition from, you know, a clerkship or private practice to in-house. I have found it to be an extremely rewarding career. Looking back at all the companies that I've worked at in the industry that I touch, yeah, they have made me a much better lawyer and honestly, a much better human being. So I'm very happy for everything, all the opportunities that were given to me through my career.
Wonderful. Thanks, Flavia. Anybody else want to jump in? George, go ahead.
Yep, I'll say, you know, for folks listening, as you've gathered through this hour-long presentation or a panel, there really isn't one pathway to going in-house, right? Everyone's pathway is different. You know, some of it is intentional, you know, and really some of it is luck. So do not think to yourself, hey, you know, I'm completely out of the running because I don't have anything that they talked about. You know, just keep working at your trade, keep making connections, keep talk to attorneys that in areas that you're interested in. Build that connection, continuing talking to folks, shake hands, and, you know, just put yourself, and luck really favors you when you've done as much as you can to put yourself in that position.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, George. Afia?
Sure, I agree with that. I'd say find the thing that energizes you and don't be, you know, hindered by labels. You know, I could have said I'm a litigator forever and stuck there, but I'd say I did the work of thinking, well, these other things are also interesting to me, and don't box yourself in, and give yourself that opportunity to spread your wings and to learn new things.
Yep. And only thing I'll add to all that, and I think that's all great advice, is think as much about the geography of where you want to practice, the industry you want to practice in, the type of work you want to be doing, just in terms of what your day looks like, and the culture of a given company, of a given team. I have found those things are as impactful on my satisfaction with my career as much as, you know, the substance of what I'm working on. So I would say to think about that as well. Thank you so much, Flavia, Afia, George, for joining us on the panel today. This has been a lot of fun. Hope you all found it useful. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Yeah, thank you all. Lindsay, thank you too. This was wonderful. All of the information that you shared not only is useful, but also inspiring. For anybody who would like to watch the presentation again, we did record and it will be available on our YouTube channel in the next day or so. Also, stay tuned for future panels. We have a resume best practices coming up February 28th, an interview prep on April 3rd, and networking and relationship building on May 1st. So we'll be promoting all of those soon. Thanks again for joining. Thank you so much again to the panelists, and have a great day.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much. Bye-bye.